There's actually quite different foods in Zimbabwe. You have what's called makimbi, which is it's a caterpillar. It's about this large, about this wide. They dry out the caterpillar, and then they will cook it in, after they dry it out, they cook it in grease and then serve it to you. I've also was fed termites. So I actually take termites and fry those up. I never tried this, but they call grasshoppers, they call them larvae, or but it's a grasshopper. You'll find little kids will go into the fields and catch those and rip the wings off and eat them. So you'll see that happen a lot. So they do eat bugs in Africa. And I did eat bugs in Africa. The main food that you'll eat there is called sudza, or estuala down in Bulawayo. And in South Africa it's called pop. But basically it's our field corn that we feed our cows, so maize. So it's kind of the rougher corn, not a sweet corn. They grind it up, is what they make like corn tortillas. So instead of making corn tortillas, they make it into more like a mashed potato substance. And then that is like they give you a big plop of that on your plate with some side of greens. And if they really, are well-to-do, they'll give you chicken, or they'll give you some kind of beef with some kind of soup mixed in with it, with the chicken and the beef, and also with the collard greens, because really it's like a collard green type of vegetable. But they use tomatoes a lot, and yeah, but that kapenta was pretty tough, or the makimbi was pretty tough. And the last thing is kapenta, is this dried, it's almost like the size of a goldfish. They dry it out and then fry it up, and you can smell that from a few houses away. So if they're having kapenta that night, you'll smell it a few houses away, and you also will probably burp it up for a few days after. Anytime you get pulled over, as you're driving different places, they'll have roadblocks, and a lot of times the first thing they'll do if you're driving is roll down your window, and they'll put an AK-47 up to your head to show their dominance to you. So that was always always a little bit made you nervous about the circumstances, but you start to get used to it. But the crazy situation was during an election in the country, the political party ZANU-PF was out with the police force, and they were going around and intimidating people. And I was with a branch missionary on exchanges, and we've been teaching all day, and it just gotten dark. And we come around the corner, and sure enough, they're kind of felt like a mob. And they circled around me really quickly, and the branch missionary had run off because he was scared. And so here I am, all by myself, surrounded by this almost political gang with the cops that were, in connection with them, and with their, big sticks ready to beat me, and they had their guns, and they started asking me, "Hey, white man, what are you doing here?" So sure enough, I just started handing out family proclamations and telling them I'm here for Jesus, and was able to get out of it. But that was the sole time that I was a little bit nervous. The feeling that I had when I was getting on the plane to fly home, and the plane taking off the ground, and you're looking down at this place that you've been for 2 years, and you start to feel the sheer joy of the experience that you have of when you've known that you gave everything that you possibly could as a missionary, even though you're not perfect. But that experience of bittersweet of leaving these people that you love, but going home, and knowing that the Lord was happy with you, or with me in the service that I had given, and that was something that I'll never forget, and something that I cherish in my heart, was the joy that I felt as the plane lifted off the ground, but also the pains of having to say goodbye to some people I love. The greatest life lesson I learned was to be optimistic when things are not looking well, and learning how to be positive in bad experiences was the greatest lesson I could ever learn, because life's not always going to be fun, and it's not always easy. And to learn that through trials and hard times, you can still be happy, and it's a decision that you make. And it's not a circumstance that happens to you, but to know that your free agency and you deciding to be happy and you deciding to feel joy is a choice, was the greatest lesson that I've been able to carry forward from what I learned in Africa, was knowing that there's people that have less, and they're happier with less than those of us that have more, and that they see happiness and joy in a place that a lot of it's been taken from them. In Zimbabwe, their seasons are opposite of ours, so it doesn't really ever get too cold, but in Zimbabwe, when it's 50, 60 degrees, it feels a lot colder than the you know, in the US because they don't have insulation and things like that. So it doesn't get too cold, so won't really ever need anything like a jacket. But when it rains there during the rainy season is November, December, and January. When it rains, it definitely rains very, very hard. So it doesn't matter if you have an umbrella and a jacket. When it comes down, it's going to come down on you. So, but other than that, it's really hot. So the name Zimbabwe actually comes from these ruins in kind of the central part of Zimbabwe, and it's called the Great Zimbabwe. It's a former castle or fortress. They haven't really been able to find exactly who built the castle or this fortress, but it was called the Great Zimbabwe. And that's where they took the name Zimbabwe from, is from that castle. The ruins are there. So portions of that are still there, and you'll find that all over, kind of like there. It's kind of like our Mount Rushmore or our Washington, D.C. You'll find on their money and all over the political parties. And inside that castle, the only thing they found was this figurine of this bird. So you'll see this kind of bird figurine on their money as well, because that was one of the things that was found inside of the Great Zimbabwe. If you're lucky, you might be able to go visit the Great Zimbabwe, but the Great Zimbabwe is, from what I understand, a pretty immaculate place. In Zimbabwe, you have two of the main tribes. There's a few smaller tribes, but they're not really part of the greater. I mean, they're probably make up 2% of the population, but the rest of the tribe, so the main tribe is called the Shona tribe, and they speak the language called Shona, and that is the dominant tribe in the country. I think it's about 75% of the country is of Shona descent. Traditionally, from what I understood, the Shona were more of farming people, more of a smaller tribe as far as stature. And then down south you have the other tribe in the southern part of Zimbabwe, closer to South Africa. They're called the Ndebele tribe. And the Ndebele tribe speaks a different language than the Shona tribe. They speak with clicks. So it's very similar to the Zulu language that is spoken in South Africa. So the Ndebele has three main clicks. You have the Q, which is it's a popping of your tongue. Then you have an X, where you kind of suck your tongue as you're saying X. So it's like Xhosa. So Xhosa is a tribe in South Africa, which Nelson Mandela was a Xhosa. So there's the X sound, and then there's the C sound, which is, but that's in the southern area called Bulawayo, or Ndebele land is the kind of like a county is called Ndebele land, and the city down there, the larger city, is called Bulawayo, and that's the second biggest city, and it's a pretty good sized city as well. So the Ndebeles were seen as more of a warrior tribe, or kind of a tribe of warriors, which were, from what I understood, a major part of the fight for Zimbabwe's independence, because they were of a larger stature. And the Ndebele tribe originated from when Shaka Zulu was down in South Africa in the 1800s, or maybe even sooner, 1700s. They actually had run away from Shaka Zulu. Shaka Zulu was kind of a crazy king down in South Africa, or in that area. He would force people to go run off a cliff. If they didn't do that, to show that their loyalty to him, he'd kill them anyway. So it's kind of like he was a little bit crazy. So this Ndebele portion of Shaka Zulu's kingdom had gotten tired of him, and they ran up and retreated to find freedom and a better life up in Zimbabwe in the southern end. So those are the two tribes in Zimbabwe: the Shona tribe and the Ndebele tribe. So in the capital city, it's mostly spoken. Shona is mostly spoken there. In the eastern part is called Mutare. It's a mountainous part. The Shona is spoken there. And then in central Zimbabwe is a place called Gweru. And it's kind of a mixing pot, but it's mostly, I'd probably say like 60-40 for Ndebele versus Shona. I mean, there's more Shona spoken than Ndebele, whereas Bulawayo is predominantly Ndebele. So I remember the first memory. I mean, when you're going to Africa, you think, all it is huts and people living in the jungle or whatever you seem to think you see on National Geographic. But you actually get there, and the airport's actually pretty nice. They built a nice new airport, so you get there and you're a little surprised to see that they have a lot of the amenities that we have in the U.S. So the city is actually pretty large, the Harare, the capital. So you get there and you start to realize there's a lot of similarities than you might have thought about Africa beforehand. The British established Zimbabwe, so they did a really good job of establishing their infrastructures of sewer systems and transportation areas. So the cities are laid out pretty well because of the British. Where other parts of Africa, it's different because they didn't have the settlement of the British that did so well on mapping out a city. So you'll start to see it actually is pretty, normal looking. In Zimbabwe and in Africa in general, you have basically two classes of people. Upper class live in neighborhoods that they call low density. Those houses are usually about ½ acre to an acre, sometimes larger. They have what they call dura walls. They're about, 8 to 12 feet high. So you find that a lot, and most third world countries have similar circumstances. And then the high density areas are where the low income people, which is a majority, probably I think 90% of the people live in the high density. And those are called townships. And the townships were established as well by the British to help with this. They had the segregation of the blacks from the whites, whereas now that's all mixed in. So you have blacks now living in the low density because most of the whites have left Zimbabwe. But that's something you'll notice real quick, is that the low density neighborhoods, it's kind of like you're in a home, anywhere else in the world. It's a suburban area. But the high density areas are very different because, you're living in places with tin roofs, even asbestos roofs. There's usually not, in these high density areas, there's usually not anything between you and the rafters. So it's just an empty room. There's not a ceiling. It's usually just made out of brick. They don't build their houses out of wood. So then the yards are very unkept. They're usually dirt. No one has grass unless it's in those high income areas. So yeah, that's the first thing you kind of notice, is start to say, all right, what's the differences? The class differences is huge for you. The other thing was the first time that I usually travel in what they call commuter buses, and it's about the size of a Toyota minivan, one of the older, more square bread box type looking minivans. They usually put 3 people on the front, or 2 people in the front next to the driver. So there's 3 in the front, and then you usually have 4 to 5 rows of seats, and they put 4 people in each seat. So driving becomes very different because you're in a very cramped, condensed area. And it doesn't matter how big the people are, they still have to fit 4 people on a row. So you get used to being crunched, especially if you're a larger size, like I'm 6'5", so it was really hard for me to ride in those smaller buses. The first thing that shocked me was the fact that you look into the sea of people that's downtown, and for the first time you don't see anybody of a Latino descent. You don't see any Caucasian people. It's straight African people living is what you should expect. But it kind of caught me off guard to see all African people and not see a single white person. So that was a little bit shocking for me, but luckily didn't take too long to get over that. The most important thing for you to do is, especially for Americans going to Zimbabwe or Americans going to any other foreign country, is to realize America is America, and the other country, like Zimbabwe, is its own country. So the things that we do in America, we don't necessarily need to say that they're better, or America's run better, or that Americans are smarter, or everything's run better in America, because it kind of hurts feelings. I quickly noticed that they wanted to be proud of their country, and they don't need to be told that their country is not as good as the U.S. So I quickly learned that for me to touch hearts with the Zimbabweans was to love their country and respect their country, and to see the good things about their country and the good things about their culture and how unique their culture is, and start to learn about those things. And as soon as I started doing that in my first few weeks, my heart started to change and started realizing, like, yeah, I'm not in the United States anymore, and that's going to be okay. And I'm in Zimbabwe, and that's a great thing because this is what I wanted. Ultimately, I wanted to go to a different country. I wanted to live around different people. I wanted to experience different things. And so really appreciate that experience, like I talked about earlier. Appreciate that you get to serve the Lord in a place that you probably never imagined that you would go to. The British English that they speak is different. Their accents are very different. Even the first Sunday that I was at church, I sat there in sacrament meeting, and I couldn't understand a single thing that they were saying. Maybe not a single, but I couldn't understand the talk that was being given. It was in English, but their accent was so thick. And then it's also mixed with British, so you have this British African accent, which, I couldn't understand my first week or two. So you'll start to realize that they talk differently. And my wife even made fun of me when I got home because I talked differently like them. So, hello, brothers and sisters. Makadi Salabonani. This is Elder Thompson. I've been home now for just over 10 years, and I think about you every single day. Thank you for letting me come to your land, to be a part of your families. Thank you for your humility and for your spirit that you're able to carry, that taught me how to fight through any trial and any experience that life brings me. Thank you for helping me mature as a 19-year-old young man into a grown man over 2 years. Your lives changed my life, which also have affected the lives of my wife and my 2 children currently. I'll never forget the moment that the plane lifted off of Zimbabwe soil and the overwhelming spirit that overcame my heart and the joy that filled my soul. Knowing that I was leaving a land that I called home now, going back to a place that I used to call home, the United States. I miss you, and I love you.